Hello there. Thank you so much for joining us. This is News Channel Nebraska. My name's Eric McKay. Let's take a look at our top headlines today. Tax day is coming up. It's April 15th, but that's not the only reason the IRS is in the headlines today. It's reportedly negotiating a way to coordinate with the Department of Homeland Security to assist with immigration enforcement. Now, the IRS usually guards tax filer information from disclosure, but as Amy Kiley reports, working with immigration officials could represent a loosening of those protections.
I have real privacy concerns here.
The IRS and Department of Homeland Security appear closer to finalizing information sharing agreement. A person familiar with the matter says it would enable ICE to submit names and addresses of people who might be in the U.S. illegally. The source says the IRS could then cross-reference and confirm that information.
The goal of this appears to be speeding up President Trump's deportation effort.
The president's supporters say his immigration policies are what voters want.
You have an administration and a president that is strong in their conviction that they have a mandate from the voters to act, particularly on the issue of illegal immigration.
Critics say involving the IRS could endanger taxpayer privacy. The agency works under laws that usually prohibit the release of personal information.
There is a process in place for a court to look at that and decide whether or not that information should be released.
This legal analyst notes President Donald Trump's attorneys fought in court to keep his own tax records private.
And there was this huge claim that there would be, in fact, that this was some privacy information that shouldn't be let out under federal law. And so that's really the issue here.
Many taxpayers have common names like John Smith. Advocates argue that could cause errors if the IRS worked with ICE.
We're inevitably going to be encroaching on the taxes and the privacy of American citizens.
I'm Amy Kiley reporting.
Closer to home, officials providing new information on a fire at an abandoned building in southeast Nebraska. Jake Bartecki has more.
Officials are providing more information after southeast Nebraska fire crews battled a blaze on the south end of Beatrice for more than 5 hours on Friday night. Behind me here, the Dempster building on the south end of Beatrice, charred from side to side. The middle, you can see the brick kind of falling out of the building, and you can see the charring around the top. A state fire marshal is on scene. Fire Chief Brian Dakey calling it one of the top 3 fire events he's ever been involved with in his 30 years on the force.
There was a semi-trailer kind of in the middle of the complex that was on fire, and it took about 400 feet of hose, 450 feet of hose for us to be able to get back into that area. Also, we had to breach through a chain link fence and then basically go through a small forest to get into that location.
At around 10 p.m. Friday, crews were dispatched to the abandoned building that dates back to 1878. Dempster Mill Manufacturing primarily built windmills until eventually shifting to water pumps, cultivators, fertilizer spreaders, gasoline products, and recycling trailers. Despite possible contaminants, Dakey says thanks to weather conditions at the time of the blaze and work by the Environmental Protection Agency, there's no current public health threat.
But not now. And even with the way the wind conditions were, it was all blowing up.
Okay.
We had perfect weather for that, so it wasn't spreading across town. It is an EPA cleanup site. EPA has actually been in and cleaned out all the hazardous materials that they could.
Sure.
So the chemicals were not present like it would have been like 5-10 years ago.
Dakey says a number of potential causes of the fire are on the table, and a Nebraska State Fire Marshal is currently investigating. No injuries occurred to those battling the blaze. Beatrice received help from Beatrice Rural Fire, who worked to prevent ember fires from the wind, and an aerial assistance from Fairbury.
Since we have 8 people on duty, it takes more people than that for a fire this size. So as people were coming in, at a certain point we had the right numbers. Don't know what they were off the top of my head, but with the help from our neighbors, it was a tremendous benefit.
As crews remained on scene Saturday morning, a section of Highway 77 near the location of the blaze remained closed from Perkins and Caldwell streets. In Beatrice, Jake Bartecki, News Channel, Nebraska.
When the next severe weather event happens, don't get caught in the dark. Power your kitchen, HVAC, and communication systems with a Jackery solar-capable generator. Just click on our YouTube affiliate shopping tab and you're on your way. And Husker fans, the Explorer series is perfect for tailgating.
Well, the damage from last week's winter storm unseen by much of Nebraska, but it continues to affect people in southeast Nebraska. It's not for lack of effort. Workers from Goner, Davenport, Dorchester, and Ruby, some 130 linemen working for Norris Public Power District, are working to restore electricity. But nearly 1,500 customers were still without power as of early Monday. Norris says they've gotten energy back to about 12,000 of the people who initially lost power last Wednesday. We've seen hundreds of downed power poles throughout the areas hit the hardest. Well, for the second time this year, Nebraska's legislature has been presented with a proposal to alter the state's unpopular inheritance tax. This bill would give voters the option to eliminate the tax outright in next year's general election. Tim Hackett has more.
Nebraska remains one of just 5 states in the U.S. that still inflicts a tax on the relatives of the recently deceased. A proposal earlier this legislative session would reduce the inheritance tax burden on Nebraska citizens, but this month a rival proposal appeared, a constitutional amendment that would eliminate the inheritance tax altogether.
First introduced to the legislature in January, but presented to Nebraska's Revenue Committee earlier this month by Senator Bob Hallstrom, LR 13CA has a simple provision. The state and any political subdivision thereof shall be prohibited from levying an inheritance tax.
The inheritance tax affects people across all income levels and socioeconomic classes. I believe it is wrong for the government to levy this additional tax on property where annual property taxes have already been levied and annual property taxes will continue to be levied.
Supporters of Hallstrom's proposal argued that fewer taxes would make Nebraska more attractive to people considering moving to or away from the state, and that the elimination of this particular tax would force county governments to be more judicious with their spending.
Raising taxes is not the answer to government's overspending. Ending the inheritance tax is an opportunity for counties to promote fiscal responsibility by reassessing their budgets, trimming excesses and non-essentials, and eliminating or privatizing inefficient, unaffordable programs. Government must stop spending more than taxpayers can afford.
A group that stood staunchly opposed to Hallstrom's plan to remove this tax were representatives from Nebraska's many county governments, which have argued that revenue from inheritance tax is essential to helping local governments not only survive, but also provide services to their constituents. Hallstrom's proposed amendment doesn't provide the revenue replacement safety nets that Rob Clement's February bill would, so board members from counties of all sizes testified in opposition.
The simple truth is, to this bill, it may be an unintended consequence, but it is still a consequence. Without this revenue source, property taxes go up or services will be cut. And this is not just a random threat by a county board member threatening, oh, we're going to raise property tax. That's not what I'm doing. It's just simply the truth.
Regardless of which of these competing proposals ultimately gains more ground among Nebraska legislators or perhaps among Nebraska voters, Hallstrom says that he, like Clements, has the ultimate goal of eliminating the inheritance tax completely. In Jefferson County, Tim Hackett, News Channel, Nebraska.
Small-town movie theaters are more than just a place to catch the latest blockbuster. They're a hub for entertainment, community gatherings, and shared experiences. But across the country, the curtain is closing on more and more theaters. Casey Wannenberg, though, takes us to Valentine, where the community's rallying together to bring their beloved theater back to life.
This is kind of what the original theater.
If walls could speak, this building would have all kinds of stories.
I mean, it's the original walls.
Romance, comedy, even horror.
I remember walking in these very same doors.
For Danielle Argenbright,
back of the stage would be
stepping inside this old theater is like rewinding in time. She spent countless hours at the Jewel Theater until its final scene played when she was in 8th grade.
I mean, my parents went to the theater back when it was here, and they have stories about the basement in this place.
The Jewel Theater dates back to the early 1900s. During World War I, it was a community hub, showing newsreels and hosting political rallies. In 1924, an orchestra was even added to accompany silent films.
But as you can see, for acoustic purposes, they had some material on the walls.
But after nearly a century in the spotlight, The theater went dark about 30 years ago.
When I became Economic Development Director for the City of Valentine, had a lot of people coming up to me, we need a theater, we want a theater. We lost a lot of business when we lost our theater. And it's on the walls, this was original.
So Mark Hagee and a group of dedicated locals decided to rewrite the theater's story. They formed a nonprofit and started raising money. Over the past year, the grassroots campaign has pulled in thousands of dollars from the community. Then came a big plot twist. Valentine was awarded a $100,000 community development block grant.
They mentioned how particularly strong our application was for this $100,000 grant because of the local support.
The donations have allowed the nonprofit to buy the former Jewel Theater building and begin demolition.
These are all the different plans.
Next up, finding contractors, raising more money, and hopefully rolling the first film by Thanksgiving.
The theater is just not only to bring some life back to Main Street, but it's something for our children, for the youth in Valentine, and families. Like, we just need something for people to be able to go do on the weekends.
In addition to showing movies, the group also plans to build a stage back there so they can host live events.
You know, just different stuff like that, but I think that's just something that we've been missing to draw families to our community.
A community-driven production.
The original lights are located.
That's proving this small town is ready for its big premiere. In Valentine, Casey Wannenberg, News Channel, Nebraska.
And finally, one of the common complaints of the younger generation is that they don't know how to write anymore. But don't tell that to one elementary schooler in northeast Nebraska. This is the handwriting of Pierce White, a kindergartner from St. Paul's Lutheran School in Norfolk. His impressive interpretation of the sentence, "The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog," earned him the Best Handwriting in the Nation award among kindergartners from Zaner Blosser. Pierce gets a trophy and a $500 check for winning, so no worries about being able to recognize his signature when he deposits that in the bank. In the meantime, you can stay up to date with the very latest by following us online. Head to newschannelnebraska.com, click on the news tab there. You can also follow us on X, like us on Facebook and Instagram as well. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day. This is News Channel Nebraska.